Guardians, today we're covering 5 builds that have gotten incredibly strong in episode Heresy. These builds will offer you everything from high survivability, incredible artifact synergy, and even an exotic that got a major glow up. Let's jump right on into it. The first build on our list is all about dealing as much damage as possible while staying alive. Our incredible survivability comes from the exotic helmet, Insurmountable Skullfort. With this exotic, whenever we get an arc melee kill, we start health regeneration, and we get our melee charge back. The even better part is that when paired with the aspect knockout, our powered melees will immediately recover 50 to 100 health, depending on the enemy that was killed. This means that as long as we're getting a kill, we can keep using our powered melee to instantly start health regeneration and gain a boost of health. This combo becomes even stronger when paired with the right melee. Thunderclap is incredibly powerful and safe to use, and that's because at a base level it deals the most damage. It can deal damage at range, and while charging it up, you gain a whopping 80% damage resistance. And it's also worth noting that Knockout also makes it so that when scoring a melee hit that breaks an enemy's shield or deals damage to a weak enemy, you'll also get the Knockout buff. And with this buff, your uncharged melee counts as a powered melee, dealing 100% more damage, and your charged melees will deal 50% more damage. So your melees will now insta-kill weak enemies, and your charged melees can take out most elite enemies. The other big part of why this build is so strong is the new aspect Storm's Keep. Now, when placing a barricade, you immediately gain 4 stacks of bolt charge, and when standing behind your barricade, you consistently gain stacks of bolt charge over time. But the other huge part is that while behind your barricade, your weapons can now unleash bolt charge instead of needing an ability to deal damage. This is huge for DPS phases since it applies to both you and your team, adding in more total damage. And what's the flow for this build? Well, in normal play, spam your powered melee. It's incredibly strong, and it has incredible healing capabilities, so it's your best option. But because we have Storm's Keep available, when I come across a mini-boss, boss, or champion, I love to pop a barricade at distance, and then use my weapons to melt the mini-bosses from safety. And when it comes to DPS phases, I love to slam down a barricade in a position that I know will help all of my team. And if you're trying to be the most alpha, sigma, meta gamer, then you can technically double hot swap. Swap to Cures for the extra Thunder Crash damage. Then when rotating back to DPS position, swap to Hazardous Propulsion, so that every time you slam another barricade, you'll send out a volley of missiles. And the other huge tip I have is to make sure when using your Thunderclap, use it on a group of enemies, so that you can guarantee a kill. If you do, however, miss a melee, don't fret. Just slam down a barricade. Bolt Charge will not only give you more damage, but will also give you 2.5% melee energy per stack. Then you can throw a few normal punches and gain a large chunk of your melee back. When it comes to improving the build, for stats I shoot for 100 in resilience and discipline, with any leftover stats going into intellect or strength. And for weapons, you have plenty of options. I love bringing a solar primary weapon with heal clip, so that I can have some healing at range. But this season, a void primary with repulsor brace is the best option because of an artifact perk that we'll mention in a second. And for my secondary weapon, I like to bring a fusion, so I can use it as a mini boss melter. And for that heavy, Anarchy lets you deal a ton of bolt charge damage while staying safe. But honestly, Thunderlord is so easy, consistent, and even lets you send off more bolt charge explosions. As for the artifact, we do have a couple that we want to bring. Flashover is the #1 option since it makes your bolt charge deal 150% more damage. And Defibrillating Blast is also fantastic, since you now gain 55 health whenever a bolt charge goes off. As mentioned, void weapons can be really good when paired with Volatile Marksman, especially when boosted. Rapid precision hits will give volatile rounds, and then volatile detonations will give back class ability energy to spam those barricades. You can also then pair that with Maligned Harvest, so that rapidly applying volatile will make the next void damage weaken an enemy, which is great for boss DPS phases. This build is incredibly strong now that we have bolt charge. Its incredible healing and damage makes it the perfect build for anything from seasonal to endgame activities. This build is one of the main reasons I ended up getting a contest clear of the Sunder Doctrine dungeon. And if you want to see a more in-depth look at this build, then go check out this video here. The next build on the list is heavily inspired by this season's artifact. For the first time in a while, we've gotten glaive-based artifact perks. So when planning a glaive build, it only seemed right to land back on Strand Titan. And that's because we can take the aspect Banner of War to not only gain healing for us and our team, but also to gain that increased melee and glaive melee damage. Now before we get any deeper, we need to talk about the exotic for this build. In reality, you have 2 options, Synthoceps or Wormgod Caress. While at 3 or more stacks of Wormgod Caress, you'll be dealing more damage than with Synthoceps. However, Synthoceps doesn't require any kills to to increase your damage, and it gives you increased super damage. Both are great options, it really depends on what you're going for. In most scenarios, Synthoceps are easier to use, but if you care about more weapon damage and you don't mind keeping up your stacks of Worm God, then it's technically better. And the other huge part of this build is our second aspect, Into the Fray. Now, whenever we destroy a Tangle, it releases pulses that offer a small amount of health, but it also gives us and nearby allies Woven Mail for 45% damage resistance. It will be incredibly easy to create Tangles, so make sure to keep throwing them down for you and your team. And in easier content, I love bringing the Grapple Grenade, so they can use those Tangles as a free movement source. And since the artifact will be making it incredibly easy to create Threadlings, I'm also bringing Thread of Evolution to have them deal even more damage. And what's the flow for this build? Well, you want to get a melee kill to start your Banner of War for more healing and glaive damage. Then you run around spamming your glaive melee. Pretty simple, but very effective. Though I do have some helpful tips. First, don't forget about your glaive shield. This shield will block 97.5% of all damage. So if you get in a tough spot, just keep blocking to heal back up from your Banner of War. Second, the artifact boosts your glaive melee damage after blocking damage. So if you are about to deal damage to a boss or mini boss, make sure to block some damage first. And finally, your final hit in a glaive combo will deal 100% more damage. This is normally the third melee, and will give you an auto cue when it hits. You can actually block right after hitting to cancel the animation and immediately start dealing damage again. But I normally like to use this time to block more damage and reproc our artifact perks. When it comes to improving the build, for stats, I'm shooting for 100 in resilience. Then I go for a balance of strength and discipline, since both are super strong and useful. I have two glaives that I really like with this build. Winterbite can deal the most amount of damage, since it's a heavy weapon, but it can also add in that shatter damage. Though Vex Caliber is a ton of fun to use. You can block to gain Void Overshield. Then glaive melees will deal more damage, and kills will instantly reproc your Void Overshield. And using a special ammo glaive allows you the room to bring a strong heavy weapon, or a weapon that can deal precision damage, so you can deal damage at range if you need to. And for that artifact, there are two main perks that we want to bring. No Bell allows you to block damage with a glaive shield to gain 85% increased glaive melee damage, and it'll make it so that special ammo glaive melee kills will refund ammo. You also want to bring Hold the Line, so that you gain 55 health whenever you get glaive melee kills while you're surrounded. I also then love to bring Unraveling Orbs and Horde Shuttle paired with a Strand weapon. That way I can pick up an orb or a tangle and get unraveling rounds. Then dealing damage to an unraveled target will create Threadlings for more overall damage. And I haven't been a huge fan of glaive builds in the past, but this build is definitely making me see them in a new light, though you still have to watch out for those exploding enemies. And before we get to the next build, if you're enjoying the video, if you could head down and hit that like button or subscribe, it would mean the world to me. Alright, let's get back to it. And this next build is actually one that pairs perfectly with our previous build. This season, Ward of Dawn got an update. Now on cast, it'll weaken nearby enemies, and this makes it a decent option for DPS on mini bosses or bosses that you can get close to. So the perfect pairing for this build is the exotic Helm of Saint 14. This exotic offers Bubble a few benefits. First, it disorients any enemies near the bubble. Second, it gives a Void Overshield when leaving the bubble. And it also gives you and allies Weapons of Light, which is now technically stronger than Radiant, but is equivalent to Well of Radiance. I know, a bit confusing. Since we basically want to be on top of the boss while dealing damage, we want to bring weapons that are close range. That's why a Banner of War Titan with glaive melee damage or dealing damage with swords is your best option. The other alternative is to bring Legend of Acreus to deal a ton of damage, though it does get a bit awkward if the boss keeps going in and out of that bubble. Since this season has a ton of benefits from void weapons as well, this build is actually really strong in the mid-game rotation. Weapons with Repulsor Brace are perfect since we're bringing the aspect offensive bulwark. That way, when we have a Void Overshield, we gain 400% grenade recharge rate. We gain a ton of Overshield from Repulsor Brace, but also from our other aspect, Bastion. That way, we can pop a barricade to give us and nearby teammates some more Overshield. And with the buff to Void Overshields received last season, your survivability has never been higher on Void Titan. And what's the flow for this build? Well, you want to pop your bubble on the boss. That is, if you can deal damage at close range. Otherwise, you can use your bubble as safety and pop it far away, moving in and out of the bubble anytime you need to reload. You get your bubble back really quick, so in game modes like Onslaught, I love to pop my bubble in alleyways so that enemies will be slowed while approaching the ADU. You can then use your void weapons to spread a ton of volatility, and then pop your barricade whenever you need to either gain some survivability or rapidly gain back your grenade. And when it comes to improving the build for stats, I shoot for 100 in resilience and discipline. Then I go for a mix of strength and intellect. And as we mentioned, a void primary with repulsor brace is my go-to. Then I like to bring a void heavy if I can. Otherwise, Legend of Acreus is really strong and can deal a ton of damage to most bosses. And for that artifact, Volatile Marksman is huge for this build. Now, rapid precision hits give your void weapons volatile rounds, so you can easily proc repulsor brace. And while boosted, volatile explosions will give back class ability energy for more barricades, and in turn, more overshields. Maligned Harvest is also really strong, so that rapidly inflicting volatile makes your next void damage weaken an enemy. This is really strong for those long-range DPS phases and for mini-bosses. And I love this build for game modes like Onslaught, where you have a ton of different bosses to face, and it'll help you slow down those enemies from reaching your ADU. Otherwise, this build excels when you have a boss that can easily take sword damage. One of the exotic reworks that happened this season is with Verity's Brow. Now it works similar to many other exotics that get a stacking buff. You can get weapon kills that match your grenade to increase its damage by up to 100% at 5 stacks, and it offers 1.25% grenade energy per second. Now, unfortunately, the only way that we can use this on Titan is to have the exotic class item with Spirit of Verity. So for this build, I landed back on Prismatic. The best option in my opinion is to have a class exotic with Spirit of Inmost Light and Verity. That way you can spam those grenades while having them deal a ton more damage. And for that grenade, I'm choosing the Pulse Grenade. Not only does it deal a ton of damage, but it's really easy to use. And the beautiful thing is that since our grenade is arc and our Prismatic grenade is also considered arc, we'll be buffing both of our grenades damage and keeping up our Verity stacks while Transcendent, just by getting our arc weapon kills. The rest of the build is pretty close to a concentration spam build. That way we can easily stay alive. I am choosing to bring Facet of Courage to buff our grenades by another 10% when dealing damage to an enemy that is inflicted by a darkness debuff. Then I'm also bringing Facet of Mending, so that now grenade kills will cure you, and prismatic grenade kills will give you cure times 2. Since we plan on using our weapons and grenades as the main source of damage, this will help keep us alive. And what's the flow for this build? Well, you want to bring a strong arc primary weapon. That way you can keep killing with it to keep up your stacks of Verity. Then it works pretty similar to any other Hoyle build. Spam those abilities and get back your grenade as quick as possible. Meanwhile, with each grenade kill, you'll gain a burst of health, and if you need to quickly wipe out a group of enemies, then use that Consecration Slam to ignite them. When it comes to improving the build for stats, I'm shooting for 100 in resilience and discipline. Then I go for as much strength as possible. With Spirit of Verity, we need to bring arc weapons to keep up your stacks. There are plenty of great arc primary weapons to choose from, though I love bringing one with attrition orbs. That way I can gain back more bolt charge stacks from Facet of Purpose. And this also means you can bring your favorite arc heavy weapon like Queenbreaker or Thunderlord, since you can bring your arc weapon surge to get the most out of both your primary and heavy weapon. For the artifact, it mainly depends on what weapons you want to bring, but since we want to bring 2 arc weapons, Overclock and Load will offer you more reload speed and handling, and Dielectric will give you bolt charge whenever killing an arc debuff enemy. And you can bring Photonic Flare, so that killing an exhausted or severed enemy with arc damage will create a blinding burst. While I don't think this build will be meta or the best in Grandmaster environments, I think it does provide you with a fun alternative to play Prismatic Titan. And before we get to the last build on our list, I do have one bonus build that almost made the list. Last season's rework to Icefall Mantle made it really strong. Well, this season it got even stronger since Frost Armor now provides even more damage resistance. And for the last build, I wanted to feature an exotic that got a major glow up this season. Khepri's Horn is an exotic that was laughably bad. The only time I considered using it was for the unique interaction with Dranger's Lash, but this season all of that changes. We can still use our barricade to send out solar waves, but now we send out 3 waves instead of just 1, though they no longer return back to the barricade. These waves deal a good amount of damage, and they scorch enemies, but it'll also create a sunspot in any enemy that it hits. This is huge since we can take Ember of Ashes to apply 90 scorch whenever a wave hits an enemy. Then a sunspot will immediately form, adding that extra 10 stacks of scorch, meaning that any enemy that gets hit from your barricade will ignite. The other huge part of this exotic is that solar kills will provide 15% class ability energy, though there is a 1-second cooldown. So now you can use your melee, solar weapons, or even your ignitions and sunspots, and they'll all feed back a ton of class ability energy. The one big gripe that I have is that the solar waves won't be buffed by Roaring Flames. Now I'm still choosing to take Roaring Flames. That way our melee and grenade can deal more damage, but mainly so that our super will deal an extra 73% more damage at 3 stacks. With the new roaming super regeneration update from last season, we can take take Hammer of Soul, and we'll get our super back in no time. That way you can spam that barricade to wipe out groups of enemies. Then pop your super if you need to deal damage at range or just want to quickly wipe out a ton of enemies. And what's the flow for this build? Well, it's honestly really simple. Pop your barricade as much as possible. You can then walk through sunspots to gain restoration, or you can use your throwing hammer to create a sunspot near you. Then kill with your solar weapons to extend that restoration and feed back into your barricade. Anytime I got low on health or just needed some damage at range, I pop that super and start throwing those hammers. Though I do try to get 3 powered melee kills before popping my super, that way I can deal the most damage with it. In tougher content, you can swap out the grenade for the healing grenade. That way you can have an easy way to proc restoration and gain a burst of health. When it comes to improving the build for stats, I shoot for 100 in resilience and discipline, and then I go for a mix of strength and intellect. When it comes to the weapons, any solar weapon with heal clip and incandescent is the best option. For heavy weapons, Parasite is a ton of fun and allows you to nuke mini bosses, but I actually had a ton of fun using Heir Apparent since it does take advantage of those artifact perks. And speaking of artifact perks, if you are bringing a solar machine gun, Heavy Ordnance is great for more damage resistance and ability regeneration. And you could bring Hold the Line. That way machine guns will restore health when getting kills while surrounded. I'm actually shocked at how good this build has become. I was running this build in a Master Lost sector at 24 power under, and it actually felt really good. Definitely give it a try before writing it off. And there you have it, Guardians. We've covered builds that deal a ton of boss damage, builds that make the most out of the artifact, and even builds that got a major glow up. But if you want to see a hunter build that's incredibly fun to use, go check out this video here. Found this video helpful or just enjoyed seeing a new perspective? Feel free to like the video and comment down below on what builds you've been enjoying most for Titans. Keep an eye out for future videos as we continue to explore the ever-evolving world of Destiny 2. Until then, may the threads of fate be ever in your favor. This is Lucky Mech, signing off. See you on the next adventure, Guardians.